welcome to today's webinar, Understanding Autism from Confusion to Awareness. My name is Adriana, and I'm thrilled to have you all here, whether you're a caregiver, educator, professional, or just someone looking to understand more about autism spectrum disorder. This session is for you. So today in this webinar, we will be exploring what autism really is, what it looks like, debunking common myths, recognizing early signs and the importance of early intervention, diverse experiences of autism, creating inclusive spaces, advocacy, and support. And by the end of this session, I hope you will leave with a deeper understanding and tools to foster an acceptance for advocacy. So before we dive in with the main stuff about the webinar, I just wanted to take a moment for you to reflect, to realize, to think about what questions you might have, and if you feel free to jot them down or write them in the chat for later. Okay, so let's start. So what is autism spectrum disorder, also known as ASD? Autism spectrum disorder, or ASD, is a neurodevelopment condition that affects how individuals communicate, behave, and interact socially. The word spectrum is key in this term because autism looks different for every single individual, and some people may have mild challenges while others experience significant difficulties. And so it's important to realize that autism is not a disease or a problem to necessarily fix. It's a different way of experiencing and interacting with the world. Some individuals with autism may struggle with things like verbal communication, while others may struggle with articulation and face social challenges. And it's also important to realize that autism is lifelong and experiences vary based person to person. So what does it look like? So when you search the autism spectrum online, you're first provided with this image over here about where it looks like a linear scale. And the most common thing that appears is that there's less autistic on one side and more autistic on the other. And sometimes you might also see words like high functioning or low functioning. While this image provides a general overview of autism, it's important to note that it's also not an accurate illustration of what autism looks like. So when you look at the other image on the screen, you also see that it's more like a multidimensional puzzle with dozens of different colors and varying gradients, all kind of intertwined. So on this image over here, it looks like a circular rainbow, and each color represents the different symptoms of autism. So on the screen, you can see things like anxiety, social difficulties, communication, emotional regulation. These are all symptoms of what autism may manifest person to person. And so the colors represent different symptoms, and the stronger the colors on the outside of the circle, they represent the most severe symptoms. So they go outside to inside. And the lighter color represents a diminished or non-existent symptom, and many of these symptoms are intertwined and can be found in different combinations, and that's also why it's really difficult to find or difficult to diagnose autism, because not two people will ever have the same combination of symptoms. Now let's moving on to debunking common myths. So myth number one is that people with autism lack emotion. And I think this is something that's been told a lot or talked about quite commonly, when in fact, individuals with autism experience emotions deeply, just as much as anyone else does, but they may, however, express those emotions differently, such as through body language or repetitive behaviors instead of words. The second myth is that autism is caused by poor parenting or vaccines, and they think it's either a genetic problem or environmental. And the fact is that autism is not caused by parenting or vaccines. It's a complex interplay of genetics and environmental factors. And extensive research has shown that it's a complex thing to navigate, and it is an intertwined result of many various aspects. Myth three is that all people have extraordinary talents, and while some people with autism may have exceptional abilities like heightened maths or artistic skills. This is not necessarily true to everyone or to generalize to the public. Every individual does have their own strengths and challenges. And just because that person has autism doesn't mean they're significantly better at one thing or the other. Moving on to early signs. So, some key indicators when recognizing early signs to watch out for, especially in young children, is limited eye contact or the lack of response when called by name. Sometimes kids won't necessarily look you in the eye or won't be especially aware of when they hear their name being called out, and that is something to look out for. Another thing is delayed speech development or repetitive language, like when they keep repeating the same words or phrases in response to something that you're saying or just in general. It can also be an early sign. So, and this also ties into repetitive behaviors. Some people will do things like hand flapping, spinning objects, or even like lining up their toys really specifically, and those are all also signs. And then lastly, sensory sensitivities. So people might have aversion to loud noises or bright lights or certain specific textures, and these are all early signs of autism. So, for instance, a child who repeatedly covers their ears in noisy spaces might be exhibiting a sensory overload or sensory sensitivity to the noises outside, and that could be a sign for you to notice that they might be struggling with autism. Next, so why does this really matter? What is the importance of early intervention? Um, It matters because it helps improve communication, social skills, and independence, and it builds on strengths and skills to kind of support lifelong growth. Um, and strategies for this can be through applied behavioral analysis, speech therapy, and occupational therapy, and individualized educational plans, which I'll talk about just a little bit more in the next slide. So the next thing is diverse experiences of autism.
We have a comment from Leslie that please try to slow down a little bit.
Okay.
So no worries.
Sorry.
Hi, Leslie.
Sorry about that. Okay, so like I was saying, sorry, I'll go back and just repeat that. So common strategies for this are applied behavior analysis, also known as ABA, which is essentially teaching skills in small structured steps. So because it might be harder for them to keep focus or keep up with what you're saying necessarily, like sometimes you can just slow it down, break it into, like, if you have a big problem, break it down into smaller things and then work on that, so then it seems like they're achieving things slowly and steadily and it doesn't seem as overwhelming or as much. The next thing is speech and occupational therapy. So speech and occupational therapy is essentially just a way of supporting language development in daily living skills. And so it's just making sure that you're listening every day and that you're able to converse and talk in language acquisition. And it's really just helpful to make sure that it fosters good development for later on and skills for later on that they might need, as autism is a lifelong thing and they do need strategies and ways to cope with it for the future as well. And then lastly is individualized educational plans, also known as IEPs. And sometimes when schools know that children struggle with autism, they have personalized study plans or school plans tailored to a child's needs. Like, they won't be treated in a way where they're overwhelmed, or if they're feeling a certain way, you can go and talk to school counselors and stuff like that, so that you have a plan that's more tailored and specific to your needs and your desires so that you feel included. So next, we're going to talk about diverse experiences of autism. So like I mentioned earlier, autism is a spectrum, so people will have different variances of what autism means to them, whether it's what they struggle with, what they're good at, and things like that. So it's important to realize and understand that autism looks very different in each and every single individual. And some people face challenges with social interaction or sensory overload, but they can also have many strengths. And often, strengths of autism can include attention to detail, creativity and innovative thinking, and unique problem solving skills, which are really helpful, but also make sure to remember that just because these are strengths that people with autism have, it doesn't necessarily mean that every child is inherently good at something like this. People people's skills will differ person to person. So a real life example of this is actually Temple Grayson, and she is a world renowned scientist with autism, and she transformed the livestock industry with innovative designs because of her really, really close attention to detail and to see solutions that other people missed, and like her unique problem solving skills. And she was able to come up with creative and innovative designs to help that. And so, autism does, or the strengths that autism provide are really beneficial and helpful. So next we're going to move on to how you can create inclusive environments for everyone and in all sort of situations and scenarios. So the three type of ways we can is at home, in schools, and at work. So at home, we can create sensory friendly spaces, especially if the person specifically struggles with sensory overload or sensory related things. We can make sure to like have soft lighting at home, not really loud noises or quiet corners, so that they don't feel the need of, they don't have that sensory overload, which might be really beneficial to them. And you can also have clear, consistent communication and routines. It's also really helpful just to lay out plans and to have a routine down so that child's like cycles don't feel disrupted, and that they can stay consistent and feel good about it. And in schools, so I mentioned this in the strategies, but where schools will tailor schedules or classes and stuff like that for you. So it's having supportive teaching strategies also is really helpful with teachers who are talking to kids with autism or teaching kids with autism. Um, you can have things like visual aids and flexible eating patterns, and make sure that you have problems that or programs that foster inclusion and make them feel part of everything, and peer education programs to like help each other in class. And another thing is anti-bullying initiatives and peer awareness programs. It's important to make sure that the kids feel supported in classrooms and environmental school settings, and important to make sure that the peers understand that and make sure that they can feel inclusive and supportive in class. And lastly, it's work. So provide accommodations like quiet workspace and clear instructions, um, just so that it helps clear any doubts, and it makes sure that everything is laid out perfectly and they know what's expected and how to go about it. And then also just celebrating your diverse talents and recognizing it and just making small things celebrated. And then we can also recognize advocacy and show support. So, how to advocate. There are three main things that I focused on for advocacy, but I feel like you can go beyond that if you choose to. So, I said help listen and learn from autistic voices. If people are speaking up or explaining things to you specifically, use that as an opportunity and listen to it, hear it. They're speaking from firsthand experience, and what they have to say really matters. And it's important for them to feel like they're being heard and inclusive. And next is challenge stereotypes and encourage acceptance. I feel like there are a lot of stereotypes generally about a lot of things out there, and specifically maybe about autism, just because people might not be as knowledgeable about what it is, what it entails, what signs of it are, and people might have an idea about it which is not necessarily backed up by strong evidence. So it's important that if you hear something, to speak up about it if you do know better and encourage acceptance about it, because there's no reason for them to feel stigmatized. And lastly is share resources and connect with support groups. I feel like it's always helpful to when you feel included, or when you have a support system to help build you up and help make sure that you're safe and feel comfortable. So an example of this would be joining a local autism network, which can provide families and educators with invaluable support and tools. The next thing is just summarizing the key takeaways that I already talked about. So, one of the first things I mentioned is that it's called the autism spectrum disorder, which basically means that it is a spectrum and people's abilities or handling of it vary from different aspects for every single person. Everyone's experience is super unique and super different, and it's going to look like something to each individual. And it's important to make sure that everyone feels included. And the next thing is that early signs and interventions do make a difference, because it is a lifelong something that people struggle with their entire life. It's important to make sure that you do know what early signs of it are and how to intervene in those situations, just so that you can help make a difference. Like if you know someone is struggling with something or exhibiting signs of autism, make sure that you can recognize them or help them. If like you're in a really loud outside situation where someone has their ears covered or something, you can go up to them and try to talk to them, understand what's wrong, and maybe make them feel heard and listened to and seen. And then lastly, what I just talked about, inclusion and advocacy are crucial for meaningful support. I feel like it's important that everyone feels like they have that sense of community, have that sense of belonging. And if you can help by making someone feel like that, there's no better thing than that. And then resources for further learning. So I provided with two websites, so Autism Speaks and Autism Society. Those are both really helpful websites that if you do want to learn more about and explore more things about it, I feel like those are two really helpful websites in learning more and exploring, or even passing it to someone who wants to learn more about it. If you have friends that experience autism and you just want to make sure that your friend group knows everything and wants to make that person feel included, I feel like those are good resources. And then there are many books about autism out there. Two that I specifically picked are The Reason I Jump and Neurotribes. I think those are good books. And then support groups, like I mentioned earlier, just to make sure that everyone feels included. You can look for local autism networks and advocacy organizations, just because inclusion, understanding, and advocacy are very important aspects of it. So it's Q&A time. Thank you for joining the session. And if you have any questions, I'll open the floor on anything that I can clarify or talk about again if you missed it, if I was going too fast or anything like that.
Yeah, and so Lily has shared with us that Autism BC has a support group. So
Yeah.
thank you so much for the information.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm sure BC has probably a lot of support groups. I'm not too familiar about the BC specific ones, but even if you're not from BC, I'm sure that there are online platforms where you can join people from other places and feel included and feel part of that sense and have that sense of community as well. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Let's give like 30 seconds for the
Yeah,
delay.
just in case any more questions, or if you want me to go over something again, I'll be happy to.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
If
And
you
then,
want, you can go the next slide.
yeah. And then you can get your participation certificate. So all this means is that you basically just have to see the scan the QR code and send us an email. Yeah. Sounds good.
Sounds perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect. Thank you so much for joining us for today's session. And I hope that you were able to learn something and hopefully benefited from this webinar. And together we can move forward from awareness and understanding to meaningful advocacy. Thank you.